The spit that started it all. The room was silent, the tension hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. Princess Celira stood before the human soldier, her eyes burning with anger. Her royal gown shimmered under the dim lights, but the fury in her eyes made it hard to look at her as anything but a warrior. "You think you're going to save me?" She spat, her voice cold and harsh. "You're just a human, weak, pathetic. You have no place here." Her words were sharp, cutting through the air like blades. She looked down at the human, standing tall but clearly out of place in the palace halls. His uniform was simple, plain nothing compared to her luxurious attire. The human soldier, named Alex, didn't flinch. His face remained calm, like stone. He had heard worse in his lifetime, far worse than the words that were meant to break him. Princess Celira had been captured in the war, and Alex's mission was simple: protect her until they could escape. But he had no idea that the woman he had to guard would be this full of hate and pride. Celira's voice rose, filled with venom, as she took a step closer to him. "You think I need your help? I don't care about your kind or your so-called honor. You'll be just another failure, another human who couldn't do what he was told." The words stung, but Alex's expression never changed. He didn't need to defend himself. He didn't need to prove anything. His mission was clear: protect her, no matter what. Without another word, she raised her hand, her eyes locked with his in defiance. And then, without hesitation, she spat. In his face, the spit landed on his cheek, cold and wet. For a moment, the room was completely still. Princess Celira looked at him, waiting for a reaction, waiting for him to snap, to show weakness, to beg for mercy. But Alex did nothing. He didn't wipe it away. He didn't get angry. Instead, he simply stood there, staring back at her dot for a long second. It felt like the world had frozen. The tension was so thick, you could almost hear the air itself holding its breath. Finally, Alex broke the silence. His voice was calm, steady, unwavering. "I will protect you," he said, wiping the spit from his cheek with a simple, slow motion. "No matter what you do, I don't care about your hate. I will protect you." Celira's eyes widened. She hadn't expected this. She had expected him to fight back, to show some kind of anger, or even fear. But no, this human stood there, not showing an ounce of doubt. He simply said those words and meant it. For a brief moment, she felt something strange stir inside her, a feeling she had long suppressed: respect. But she quickly pushed it away. She couldn't afford to show weakness. She was a princess, a warrior. She had been trained to control everything, and she was not about to let a human change that. "Why?" she asked, her voice softer now, though still filled with a trace of confusion. "Why would you protect me? After everything I've said, everything I've done?" Alex met her gaze with quiet resolve. "Because that's what soldiers do?" He replied simply. "We protect, we fight for others. And even if you don't like it, I'll be the one who keeps you alive." Celira sneered, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "You think you're so noble, don't you? A fool's quest." Alex didn't respond. He didn't need to. He knew she wouldn't understand, at least not yet. His job wasn't to win her approval or change her mind. His job was to protect her, to get her through this mess, no matter what she said or did. But as he turned to leave the room, something inside him shifted. He had seen warriors before, brave ones, noble ones. But there was something different about Princess Celira. Her pride was just a mask, a shield she used to protect herself from the pain of what had happened to her people. Beneath that anger, he sensed something fragile, something broken. He didn't know what had driven her to this point, but he was determined to find out. And maybe, just maybe, he could show her that humans were more than just a broken, defeated race, Dot, as he left the room, he could still feel her eyes on him. He didn't know how this mission would turn out. He didn't know if he'd succeed or fail. But one thing was certain. He wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. Asterisk the arrows coming, the tension in the air had shifted. The once volatile hatred between Alex and Princess Celira had transformed into something else, something hard to name. The princess still saw him as a tool, an expendable soldier. But Alex didn't mind. His mission had never been about her. Approval. It was about survival. For both of them, as the sounds of battle echoed outside the palace walls. The two of them stood in the dimly lit room. The hum of the energy shields, the only sound breaking the silence between them. Alex was preparing his weapons, adjusting the straps of his armor, checking the efficiency of his sidearm. Meanwhile, Celira stood near the window, gazing out with a look of cold defiance, her face a mask of royal pride, the hum of the energy. Shields flickered slightly. It was a subtle change, but to Alex, it spoke volumes. He knew something was coming, and it wasn't just the invasion outside. "Are you going to stand there all day, or will you help me?" Celira's voice broke through. His concentration. She had always found a way to make her disdain for him known. Yet there was something in her tone, now almost an unspoken challenge. He turned to her, locking eyes with her, only to see her hands clenched into fists, her jaw tight. "Help you?" "With what?" Alex replied calmly. "You think I'm just a soldier here to serve your whims?" Celira's lips parted as though she were going to snap back with another insult. But instead, she looked away, her shoulders stiff. "Don't be foolish," she muttered, almost to herself. He didn't answer. There was no need. He had learned that words meant nothing in the middle of a war. Action spoke louder. Suddenly, the heavy door to the room burst open with a loud crash, and a dark figure stepped through, the shadows shifting as he entered. It was one of Celira's bodyguards, breathing heavily, his face pale with fear. "Your Highness, they're coming." "They breached the outer defenses," he gasped. His panic was obvious, his hands trembling as he looked from Celira to Alex. "The enemy has already begun their assault. There's no time to waste." Without hesitation, Alex moved toward him, his voice a low growl. "Get to the safe room. I'll cover you." His tone left no room for argument. The bodyguard nodded and rushed out, his footsteps echoing through the hall. Alex turned back to Celira, whose face had gone pale. She had always prided herself on never showing fear. But now, for the first time, her eyes betrayed her. She stepped toward Alex, and there was a flicker of something else in her expression. A softness that quickly disappeared behind the walls she had built. "Stay close," Alex commanded, pulling her toward the door. Outside, chaos reigned. The sound of explosions echoed down the halls, followed by the unmistakable crash of metal and glass. The walls shuddered under the weight of the battle that raged just beyond them. The human forces were already retreating. Their ranks were thinning as the alien invaders pressed forward, relentless and determined. But Alex was different. He wasn't just another soldier who would fold under the pressure. He had seen worse, much worse, and survived. And for some reason, he wasn't about to let Celira fall under the same fate. Even after everything she had said, after the way she had treated him, he had sworn to protect her. His duty had become more than just survival. It had become a promise. "Move!" he shouted as another explosion rocked the building. He gripped Celira's arm tighter, pulling her down the hall with him. Their steps were quick, echoing through the empty corridor, a sound of the destruction growing louder with every second. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the distance, an enemy soldier, tall and armed with a deadly-looking crossbow. Alex's instincts kicked in. Without warning, he pushed Celira to the side, stepping forward, his hand reaching for the energy shield at his side. The soldier raised his weapon, and before Alex could react, the bolt shot through the air with deadly speed. Celira gasped, her eyes wide with fear, but Alex didn't flinch. He threw himself in front of her, his body taking the brunt of the blow. The sharp pain pierced his chest like a knife. The bolt lodged deep into his side, and Alex staggered backward, his breath caught in his throat. Blood poured from the wound, and his vision blurred for a moment. Celira screamed, rushing to his side as he crumpled to the ground, clutching the shaft of the bolt lodged in his side. His body felt like it was on fire, but through the haze of pain, he managed to whisper, "I told you. I'd protect you." The world around him seemed to spin as he collapsed in her arms. He felt weak, his strength fading, but he refused to let go. Not now. Not when she needed him the most. But Celira, the proud princess who had once spat on him in contempt, was no longer that same person. Her face, usually filled with disdain, was now full of concern, full of something deeper than just duty. Looked down at him, her voice trembling. "Why? Why would you risk your life for me?" Alex's eyes met hers, and through the pain, he managed a faint smile. "Because no one deserves to die alone, princess." Her heart pounded in her chest. For the first time, she understood. She understood that the human who had once been beneath her, someone she had hated, spat on, had become the one person she could depend on. The battle outside roared on, but inside, for a fleeting moment, everything was still. The princess stared at Alex, her protector, as he fought for his life. And she knew that everything had changed. Asterisk. The first sacrifice, Alex's vision blurred, but through the haze of pain, he could still hear the sounds of battle outside, yells, explosions, the distant clash of weaponry. He could feel the warm blood soaking his side, dripping onto the cold stone floor. Yet all he could focus on was the princess cradling him in her arms, her face filled with panic and confusion. "Stay with me, human, please." Celira's voice was shaking, her hands pressing against the wound in his side, trying to stop the blood from flowing, but it was no use. The arrow had struck deep. Alex's breath came in short, labored gasps. The pain was unbearable, but it didn't matter. Not now. Not when he had made a promise. "I'm not going anywhere," he whispered, his voice weak but steady. "You need to get to safety." Celira, her eyes wide with fear, shook her head. "No, not without you. I'm not leaving you here." She looked around desperately, her mind racing for any way to save him. But they were trapped. The enemy was closing in, and she knew they didn't have much time before the palace walls fell. For a moment, she forgot her pride. She forgot her hatred for him. All that mattered was that this human, this soldier, had risked everything for her, had already paid the price for his duty. And now she had to choose. Alex's hand weakly grasped hers, his grip cold and faint. "You need to go," he repeated, trying to stay conscious. "They'll come for you. I can't protect you, ... if I'm dead." Her heart hammered in her chest. She could see the life fading from his eyes, and for the first time, she felt a pang of something she had never expected, guilt. But there was no time for guilt. She had to make a choice. And suddenly, the weight of her royal blood, her title, everything she had ever known felt useless. The battle outside wasn't going to stop for her. For them, she didn't even hesitate. With a sudden strength she didn't know she had, she lifted Alex with the help of her bodyguards who had returned. She dragged him toward the hidden chamber, her feet stumbling as she tried to ignore the pressure building in her chest. The blood loss was too much. He was slipping away, as they moved through the halls. The enemy was closing in, but Celira had never felt so determined. Her people, her kingdom, had once looked down on humans, considering them insignificant. But now, the most important thing in her life was lying in her arms. Alex, a human, had thrown himself into harm's way for her, and she couldn't just leave him to die. "Help me," she shouted to the soldiers following her, her voice desperate. "We have to keep him alive." They reached the hidden chamber, a secret space deep within the palace, protected by layers of security. She laid Alex gently on the cold stone floor, her hands trembling as she tried to stabilize his wound. But the blood kept coming, and she couldn't stop it. The minutes felt like hours. She could hear the sounds of fighting growing louder outside. The walls shuddered with the force of the invasion. Yet all she could focus on was the human soldier before her, his life slowly slipping away. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please stay with me. I can't lose you. She trailed off, realizing she had never said those words to anyone before, not like this. Alex's eyes fluttered, and he managed a weak smile. "You're not alone." "Princess," he said, his words slurred. "I promise ... I protect you ... Salira's eyes filled with unshed tears. She had never let anyone in, never allowed herself to care for anyone beyond her duty. But this soldier, this human who had given everything for her, he had become her only ally, her only hope. "I can't do this without you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. But there was nothing more to say. As Alex's breathing slowed, Salira knew he was on the edge. He had sacrificed everything for her, and now it was up to her to keep him alive. Just as she was about to give in to the crushing weight of fear and guilt, something happened. Alex's hand weakly moved, his fingers grazing her arm. "I'm not done yet." "Princess," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "Not yet." The words barely reached her ears, but they were enough. A spark of hope flickered within her. She wasn't alone, not anymore. "Stay with me," she whispered, pressing her forehead to his, her breath shaky. "We're going to make it through this. I won't leave you behind." As the battle raged on outside, inside the hidden chamber, a promise was made. A promise not of duty or loyalty, but of survival, of a bond that had formed between two enemies, one human, one alien, but both determined to fight. To live ... the princess's regret. The sound of the battle outside grew more frantic, the pounding of enemy footsteps echoing through the corridors as the palace walls shook with every blast. But in the hidden chamber, all that mattered was the faint breathing of Alex, whose life hung by a thread. Salira sat beside him, her hands trembling as she continued to apply pressure to his wound, but the blood wouldn't stop. Her royal composure had shattered. She had always been the one in control, but here, with Alex's life in her hands, she was powerless. "Stay with me, Alex," she whispered again, her voice barely more than a breath. Her words were repeated more as a mantra than a plea. She couldn't afford to lose him, not after everything he had done for her. She wiped her brow, sweat mixing with the tears that threatened to fall. In the years of her royal training, she had learned to control her emotions, to suppress every feeling that might weaken her. But now, as she sat beside the human who had thrown himself in front of death to save her, she realized how empty that training had been. All the pride, the titles, the power, it meant nothing in this moment. "Why?" she murmured, almost to herself. "Why would you do this? Why would you sacrifice everything for someone like me?" For a moment there was no response, and Salira's heart twisted with fear. She could feel the weight of her question hanging in the air. What had she done to deserve this? What had she done to make him throw away his life for her? As if answering her unspoken thoughts, Alex's voice broke through the stillness. His words were weak, barely above a whisper, but they were enough to shake her to her core, double quotes, because ... "You matter," he said, his eyes fluttering open. barely focusing. We all matter. No one ... should be left to die alone. His words struck her harder than any physical blow. She had spent her entire life surrounded by privilege and power, never once questioning why others lived and died in the shadows of her kingdom. But Alex the human she had once scorned, the one she had thought of as nothing more than a tool, had seen something in her, something she had buried deep within herself. He had seen her worth, even when she couldn't see it herself. Tears finally spilled from Celira's eyes, but she wiped them away quickly, afraid of showing weakness. She had been so focused on her own pride, her own pain, that she hadn't even noticed the humanity in front of her. The courage, the selflessness. She had spit on him, belittled him, and yet here he was, fighting for her life. "I don't deserve this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't deserve you?" The words felt foreign on her tongue, but she couldn't stop them. The guilt was overwhelming, threatening to crush her. "I treated you like nothing, like you were less than me." Alex's hand reached out weakly, his fingers brushing her arm. His grip was weak, but there was a strength in it that made her heart ache. "Don't," he rasped. "It's not about ... deserving." He paused to take a breath, a grimace of pain crossing his face. "I don't regret it. I never ... will." Celira couldn't breathe. The weight of his words hung over her like a shroud. In that moment, she realized something that she had never understood before. True strength wasn't in the power to command armies or the ability to rule a kingdom. It was in the willingness to give everything, even life itself, for another. Alex had shown her what it meant to truly care, and in return, she had shown him nothing but scorn. "I'm sorry," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I was wrong ... about everything." Alex's eyes fluttered again, but his lips curved into a faint, exhausted smile. "We ... both were," he said. His voice was weak, but there was something in his words that comforted her, a recognition that they were both flawed, both human in their imperfections. But they were still here, together. Celira's heart beat faster, and the weight of the moment settled upon her like a wave crashing over her. For the first time, she felt something shift inside her, a crack in the armor she had worn for so long. The walls that had protected her, that had kept her from seeing the truth about herself and others, were crumbling, and she wasn't sure whether to be afraid or grateful. She leaned forward, gently brushing his hair from his forehead, her fingers trembling. "You're right," she said, her voice firm with newfound resolve. "We both were wrong, but I won't make that mistake again. I won't leave you behind." Alex's eyes fluttered once more, his smile growing a little stronger. "I knew you wouldn't." His voice trailed off, and for a moment it seemed like he might slip away, but then his grip tightened on her hand, a subtle reassurance that he wasn't done yet. Outside, the sounds of battle continued to rage, but inside the hidden chamber, the battle for Celira's heart and mind was finally over. She had spent her life in search of power, but now she realized that true strength wasn't about ruling others. It was about saving them, protecting them, and being willing to stand beside them, no matter the cost. "I won't leave you, Alex," she said again, her voice steadier now, her resolve growing. "I will fight. For you, for us." A new alliance. The room was quiet now, save for the occasional hum of the energy shields and the distant thunder of battle outside. The once mighty palace had fallen silent in the wake of the invasion, but inside the hidden chamber, a new kind of quiet had settled. Celira sat beside Alex, her hand still resting gently on his, the only warmth she felt in the cold, dimly lit room. Her mind was racing, filled with everything that had happened, everything that had changed. The arrogance, the pride, the belief. that she was untouchable, superior, everything she had built her life on had come crashing down in the space of a few hours. It had all started with the spit, but now it was about something far greater, her duty to protect the man who had saved her life. Despite everything she had done to push him away, she stood slowly, her legs weak, but her resolve unshaken. She looked down at Alex, whose breathing was still shallow but steady. His face was pale, his wounds grave, but there was a spark in him that wouldn't fade. He was alive. And as long as he was, she would fight for him, for them. A soft knock on the chamber door broke her thoughts. Her bodyguards entered, their faces grim with the weight of the situation. They had been the ones to help carry Alex here, but now there was no time for rest. "Your Highness," one of the guards said, bowing respectfully, "we have a new problem. The invaders have breached the palace walls. The last line of defense has fallen." Salira's chest tightened, but she didn't flinch. She had always been taught to face challenges with strength, to never show fear. But now, she wasn't just thinking of her own life. She was thinking of Alex, of the soldiers still fighting outside, and of her kingdom. "How much time do we have?" she asked, her voice low but firm. "Minutes," the guard replied, his voice laced with urgency. "Perhaps less. The enemy is pushing through every sector." For a moment, Salira stood frozen, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She could feel the tension in the air, the lives of her people hanging in the balance. They could flee, retreat into the underground chambers, and wait out the storm. But Salira knew deep down there was no safety in hiding. If she ran now, she would lose everything. The enemy would find them. They would take it all, and worse. She would have nothing left to fight for. She turned to the guards, her gaze steely, her voice calm but filled with newfound determination. "We fight. We stand. Our ground." The guards exchanged glances, but they knew better than to argue. A princess had made her choice. She was no longer a symbol of distant royalty. She was a warrior. And the time for hiding was over. Salira moved swiftly, her hands shaking with the adrenaline now coursing through her veins. She crossed the chamber and knelt beside Alex, her fingers brushing his face softly. She could see the lines of pain etched into his features, but there was also something else, something more than just a soldier's resolve. There was hope, hope that they could make it through this together. She took a deep breath. The sound of her heart was loud in her ears, but she pushed it aside. She needed him now, more than ever. "Alex," she whispered, "we need to move. The enemy is close, and I can't do this without you." His eyes fluttered open, faint but filled with recognition. "You ... want to fight?" His voice was hoarse, barely audible, but the question hung in the air like a lifeline. "Yes," Salira replied, her voice stronger now. "We fight. We fight for each other, for the future of our people, for everything we have left." Alex's hand tightened around hers, and though he could barely lift his head, he nodded. "Then, let's make it count." A new fire sparked in Salira's chest as she stood. This was no longer about duty. It was about something deeper, about loyalty, sacrifice, and the bond they had forged in the fires of war. She wasn't just the princess of a dying kingdom anymore. She was a leader, and for the first time, she truly understood what that meant. Turning to her guards, she gave a decisive nod. "Prepare the weapons. We're going to retake the palace, and we're going to send a message. Humanity, together, will never bow." As she moved to gather what little they had in terms of weapons, she knew this fight was going to cost them everything. But for the first time, she didn't feel alone. Alex would fight beside her, and they would face the future together. They were no longer enemies, no longer divided by species, pride, or history. They were allies. And that, above all, would make Them unstoppable dot asterisk. The unexpected twist. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and the deafening roar of battle. Outside the hidden chamber, the sounds of war echoed louder than ever explosions. The clash of metal and the shouts of soldiers caught in a desperate struggle. Inside, however, Celira stood motionless, a quiet storm raging within her. She wasn't sure what drove her more, her need to protect Alex or her newfound purpose to fight for her kingdom. But as the weight of the decision settled, something unexpected happened. The door to the chamber burst open with a heavy thud, and in stepped a figure that made Celira's heart stop. It was her father, the king. His once regal armor was now battered and bloodied, his face weary from the horrors of the battle that had raged through the palace. His eyes locked onto her, and for the first time, Celira felt something she hadn't expected. Fear. "Father," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She hadn't seen him since the war had begun. She didn't know if he was even alive, or if she would ever see him again. "Celira," the king said, his voice rough but steady. "You need to leave. There's no time for this. The enemy is here at the palace gates. The last line of defenses gone. You must run." Celira shook her head, her defiance evident. "No, I won't leave. I've already made my choice." Her hand instinctively moved to Alex's side, where he lay on the floor, barely conscious, but still breathing. "I will fight. I'll stay here, with him." The king's gaze softened for a moment, as if he truly saw her for the first time. The walls of authority, pride, and royal expectations seemed to crumble before him. For once, he looked like a father, not a king. "I don't understand you, Celira. You've always been about honor, power, and blood. But now you choose this ... a human." Celira didn't respond at first, her eyes moving back to Alex, who, though weak, had begun to stir. A small but steady pulse of strength seemed to be returning. To him. She looked at her father with a quiet intensity. "This human," she said slowly, her voice steady, "has shown me more honor than anyone I've ever known. He saved my life, not because of duty, but because of something deeper. He believes in something in us, and I believe in him. He has fought beside me for me when I never deserved it. More than I can say for any soldier in my army or any noble in my court. He is worth every ounce of my loyalty." The king stood there, silent. The air between them grew tense, the weight of his decision pressing down on his chest. He had always seen Celira as his heir, his successor, and he had prepared her for a life of command, a life of power. But now, as he looked at her, he saw something else, something he hadn't expected. His daughter, the princess who had once been arrogant and untouchable, was no longer just a royal figure. She had become something else entirely. "I see now," he murmured, almost to himself. "You've changed." His voice faltered. "I wish I had seen it sooner." Celira stepped forward, her voice quiet but resolute. "You raised me to believe that. Power came from control, but I've learned something different. Power comes from knowing when to fight for others, not to conquer them." The king's shoulders slumped, a deep sigh escaping his lips. He looked at her, seeing for the first time the true leader she had become. "Then we fight together," he said quietly, placing his hand on her shoulder. But before Celira could respond, a flash of movement caught her eye. Alex, despite his injuries, had pushed himself to sit up. His hand gripped the stone floor, and he looked up at her, his face pale but determined. "I'm not staying behind," he rasped, his voice thick with pain. "If we're fighting, I'm in, no matter the cost." Celira's heart clenched. She could see it now. The same strength, the same resolve that had guided her from the beginning. Alex wasn't just a soldier. He was her partner, her equal. She had once thought of him as nothing more than a tool, but now he had become the Thiel, symbol of everything she had been blind to: compassion, sacrifice, and trust. Alex ... she whispered, her voice faltering. She didn't know what more to say. She didn't need to. Alex managed a faint, painful smile. No more hiding, Princess. If this is how it ends, then we make sure it ends on our terms. The king, who had been watching them in silence, nodded. There was a flicker of pride in his eyes. Then let's make sure we take back what's ours. His voice hardened. We fight until the very end, together. In that moment, something shifted inside Celira. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for everything she had believed in, for everything she had lost, and everything she was about to gain. Her father, her people, and even her kingdom, they had all been part of the system that had betrayed humanity, that had betrayed her. But now, with Alex by her side, with her father standing alongside her, she understood that this battle wasn't just about winning. It was about making the impossible possible. It was about forging a new path, one where the lines between enemies and allies blurred. Celira stood tall, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and excitement. We fight, she declared, her voice stronger than it had ever been. We fight for the future. We fight for each other.